The night I was supposed to die was the night I finally came alive. I had always expected my first shift to be a quiet, lonely thing. 18 years as the wolfless girl, the omega disappointment of the Silent Fang pack, had taught me to have no witnesses for my failures or my rare moments of becoming. I certainly never expected an audience of hundreds, and I absolutely never expected a king. The gathering of the 5 kingdoms glittered below the fortress of Blackcliff like a handful of stolen stars thrown into the valley. Banners of wolf heads and crescent moons snapped in the icy mountain wind. The air itself tasted of power: pine, frost, iron, and the sharp, clean scent of alpha dominance that made my bones feel too small for my skin. I kept to the deepest shadows at the rear of the great stone terrace, my threadbare cloak pulled tight. Just one more nameless face in a sea of leather armor and keen, watchful eyes. "Still the little moon ghost," a warrior muttered as he passed, not even bothering to lower his voice. The old nickname slid off me, half pity, half scorn. I was used to it. My own pack had already taken their place among the honored, my father not even glancing back to see if I'd followed. To him, I was already gone. The moon, full and merciless, climbed to its peak. A hush fell, thicker than the mountain mist. The ruling alphas of each kingdom stepped to the cliff's edge, heads tilted back in silent communion with the ancient magic. My skin began to prickle, a strange heat uncurling in my belly. "Not yet," I begged my silent wolf. "Don't emerge here in front of them all." But it wasn't the shift that hit me. It was a snap, a violent, deafening crack inside my chest, as if an invisible chain had been hooked around my heart and yanked taut. The air left my lungs in a pained gasp. I stumbled, my hand flying to my sternum. A flood of wildfire, golden and terrifying, raced through my veins. And with it came a scent: storm-racked cliffs, old blood on snow, and beneath it something darkly sweet, like midnight berries. A whisper from a part of me I never knew existed rose in answer. Mine. The world blurred into roaring silence. The speeches of alliance, a posturing of alphas, it all melted into a distant hum. That invisible chain was pulling me, dragging me through the press of magnificent, terrifying bodies. I fought it. I dug my heels into the rough stone. The more I resisted, the more it hurt, a burning pressure behind my ribs threatening to splinter them. So I moved. I became a ghost slipping between legends, muttering unheard apologies. My feet knew where to go, even as my mind screamed in protest. Each step tightened the bond, the scent growing stronger, more intoxicating, turning my legs to water. And for the first time in my life, my wolf stirred. Not a shift, but a presence, a sleepy, powerful awareness, stretching awake and reaching, howling silently for what lay ahead. The crowd parted, and I saw him. Kalen Lackmane, the Alpha King, stood on the central dais beneath a banner of a snarling black wolf on a field of silver. I had seen his likeness in sketches, heard tales of his conquests that chilled the blood. They did not do him justice. He was a mountain carved into the shape of a man, taller than any in the hall, shoulders broad under obsidian armor. His hair, the color of a starless night, was tied back, revealing a face that was all harsh angles and solemn lines, a map of too many wars and too little mercy. The torchlight loved those lines, deepening them, making him look both ancient and lethally young. He turned. Our eyes met. The world did not just fall away, it shattered. Pure, molten gold flooded his irises, his wolf slamming into mine with the force of a landslide. The pull inside me exploded into an inferno. My knees buckled. I caught myself on a nearby column, my fingers scraping stone. For one impossible, endless heartbeat, there was nothing but him. The cacophony of the gathering vanished into a distant hum. That invisible chain was pulling me, dragging me through the press of magnificent, terrifying bodies. I fought it. I dug my heels into the rough stone. The more I resisted, the more it hurt, a burning pressure behind my ribs threatening to splinter them. So I moved. I became a ghost slipping between legends, muttering unheard apologies. My feet knew where to go, even as my mind screamed in protest. Each step tightened the bond, the scent growing stronger, more intoxicating, turning my legs to water. And for the first time in my life, my wolf stirred. Not a shift, but a presence, a sleepy, powerful awareness, stretching awake and reaching, howling silently for what lay ahead. The crowd parted, and I saw him. Kalen Blackmane, the Alpha King, stood on the central dais beneath a banner of a snarling black wolf on a field of silver. I had seen his likeness in sketches, heard tales of his conquests that chilled the blood. They did not do him justice. He was a mountain carved into the shape of a man, taller than any in the hall, shoulders broad under obsidian armor. His hair, the color of a starless night, was tied back, revealing a face that was all harsh angles and solemn lines, a map of too many wars and too little mercy. The torchlight loved those lines, deepening them, making him look both ancient and lethally young. He turned. Our eyes met. The world did not just fall away, it shattered. Pure, molten gold flooded his irises, his wolf slamming into mine with the force of a landslide. The pull inside me exploded into an inferno. My knees buckled. I caught myself on a nearby column, my fingers scraping stone. For one impossible, endless heartbeat, there was nothing but him. The cacophony of the gathering vanished into a distant hum. That invisible chain was pulling me, dragging me through the press of magnificent, terrifying bodies. I fought it. I dug my heels into the rough stone. The more I resisted, the more it hurt, a burning pressure behind my ribs threatening to splinter them. So I moved. I became a ghost slipping between legends, muttering unheard apologies. My feet knew where to go, even as my mind screamed in protest. Each step tightened the bond, the scent growing stronger, more intoxicating, turning my legs to water. And for the first time in my life, my wolf stirred. Not a shift, but a presence, a sleepy, powerful awareness, stretching awake and reaching, howling silently for what lay ahead. The crowd parted, and I saw him. Kalen Blackmane, the Alpha King, stood on the central dais beneath a banner of a snarling black wolf on a field of silver. I had seen his likeness in sketches, heard tales of his conquests that chilled the blood. They did not do him justice. He was a mountain carved into the shape of a man, taller than any in the hall, shoulders broad under obsidian armor. His hair, the color of a starless night, was tied back, revealing a face that was all harsh angles and solemn lines, a map of too many wars and too little mercy. The torchlight loved those lines, deepening them, making him look both ancient and lethally young. He turned. Our eyes met. The world did not just fall away, it shattered. Pure, molten gold flooded his irises, his wolf slamming into mine with the force of a landslide. The pull inside me exploded into an inferno. My knees buckled. I caught myself on a nearby column, my fingers scraping stone. For one impossible, endless heartbeat, there was nothing but him. The cacophony of the gathering vanished into a distant hum. That invisible chain was pulling me, dragging me through the press of magnificent, terrifying bodies. I fought it. I dug my heels into the rough stone. The more I resisted, the more it hurt, a burning pressure behind my ribs threatening to splinter them. So I moved. I became a ghost slipping between legends, muttering unheard apologies. My feet knew where to go, even as my mind screamed in protest. Each step tightened the bond, the scent growing stronger, more intoxicating, turning my legs to water. And for the first time in my life, my wolf stirred. Not a shift, but a presence, a sleepy, powerful awareness, stretching awake and reaching, howling silently for what lay ahead. The crowd parted, and I saw him. Kalen Blackmane, the Alpha King, stood on the central dais beneath a banner of a snarling black wolf on a field of silver. I had seen his likeness in sketches, heard tales of his conquests that chilled the blood. They did not do him justice. He was a mountain carved into the shape of a man, taller than... I woke to the smell of dust and damp stone. 3 days had vanished into a void of pain. My body felt hollowed out, every muscle aching as if I'd been trampled. But the worst was the constant gnawing ache in my chest. The bond. It was a sickly, feverish pulse now, a wound that would not close, connecting me to the man who had inflicted it. The room was a prison cell disguised as a chamber. Granite walls, bare and cold, leaching the warmth from the air. A high, narrow window showed a slash of gray sky. No tapestries, no furs, just a narrow bed, a rough wooden chair, and the crushing silence of the Blackmane Fortress's North Tower, the place they stored things they wished to forget. The door opened without a knock. An older woman with steel-gray hair and eyes like flint entered, carrying a tray. She set it down beside the bed without looking at me. "You're awake. Eat. The council requires you to be strong enough to stand for evaluation." Her voice was like the scrape of stone on stone. Evaluation? My own voice was a stranger's, raspy and weak. She finally glanced at me, her expression utterly blank. The bond did not break. They need to determine if it will sever naturally or if other measures will be required. Other measures. The words hung in the frigid air, a threat without shape. Where am I? The North Tower. The King's Council decreed you remain at the fortress until the situation resolves. She moved to the door, pausing with her hand on the iron handle. For what it's worth, girl, you survived the initial rejection. Most would have died on that terrace. Your stubbornness is notable. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the scent of lukewarm broth and my own despair. The North Tower was a world of whispers and forgotten things. Meals arrived in silence, delivered by servants who stared at the floor. The only other sounds were the wind keening through cracks in the stone, and at night the distant, mournful howls of the fortress wolves, a sound that made my own mangled bond twitch in pathetic response. I learned of my new status when I was summoned for my first evaluation. Healers with cold hands and colder eyes prodded at the bond through my skin, their magic like needles probing an infected wound. As I was led back through the corridors, the whispers found me. That's her, the rejected one. Pathetic, an Omega thinking she could be queen. I heard she bewitched him with moon magic. No wonder he cast her out. I kept my head down, my hands clenched into fists so tight my nails drew half-moons of blood in my palms. My wolf whimpered inside, a beaten thing. What defense was there? The king had spoken, his word was law, and his law had declared me nothing. The formal dinners were a special kind of torment. The council insisted I attend to monitor the bond's stability, they said. I was a living experiment placed at the far end of the longest table, a specimen for them to observe while the king held court. Kalen sat on his throne of black wood at the head of the hall, a figure of absolute power. He commanded the room effortlessly, his very presence a gravitational pull that even the other alphas yielded to. I sat in the shadows near the kitchen doors, between minor dignitaries who pretended I was heir, and tried not to look at him. I failed, every single time. My eyes were drawn to him as if by a cruel magnet, The bond, feeble and wounded, still reached for him. He never looked back. Not a glance, not a flicker of acknowledgement. He drank wine from a silver goblet, listened to reports from hardened generals, laughed at a joke from a visiting lord, all while acting as if the space I occupied was utterly empty. But I felt him. Oh, I felt him. At night, in my frozen room, when the fortress slept, I felt his wolf, restless, pacing, a furious, caged energy that vibrated down the ragged threads of our bond. Sometimes, in the deepest hour of the night, the bond would flare, a sudden violent surge of heat and frustration so intense that it would wrench me from a fitful sleep, gasping. On those nights, I knew he was thinking of me, fighting me, hating me, and that was worse than the rejection itself. One such night, after a dinner where he had toasted an alliance with a stunning alpha female from the coastal packs, I broke. The bond was a live wire of his suppressed fury. I curled on my thin mattress, face pressed into the rough pillow, and let the sobs come. They were silent, tearing things that left my throat raw. I hate you, I thought into the darkness, aiming the words down the bond. I hate you for making me feel this. I hate you for not letting me go. The bond pulsed once, a painful, aching throb. Far below, in the royal chambers, I felt him go utterly still. For a long moment, we were locked in that shared, silent agony. Then the connection faded back to its usual dull ache, and I was alone again, more alone than I had ever been in my silent, empty childhood. The evaluations continued. The bond shows no signs of severing naturally, a counselor said, peering at me over a scroll as if I were a stubborn stain. Inconvenient. My survival was an administrative problem. What happens if it never severs? I dared to ask, my voice small in the vast clinical room. The counselor's lips thinned. Then, girl, we find other ways to cut it, for the good of the kingdom. That night, the bond's flare was different. It wasn't just frustration, it was rage, pure and undiluted, mixed with a slash of what I could only name as fear. I felt his wolf snarling, felt the phantom sensation of claws scoring stone. He was fighting it too, with everything he had. The realization brought no comfort, because his fight was not to claim me. His fight was to destroy the bond entirely, to erase me from his soul if it killed us both. Lying there in the dark, a dangerous, fragile thought crystallized. He was in a cage of his own making, just as I was. And maybe, just maybe, the key to my cage wasn't submission. It was the opposite. The next morning, when the servant brought my allowance, a pouch of coins for my maintenance, I didn't see charity. I saw a weapon. I tipped the gold and silver into my palm. It was more wealth I'd ever touched. "Can I choose what to buy with it?" I asked. The servant hesitated. "Within reason, my lady." My lady. The title was a mockery, but I would wear it. "Good," I said, closing my fingers around the cold metal. I was done waiting to die. It was time to remind Kaylin Blackmane that I was alive. The coins in the leather pouch felt like secrets, cold, heavy secrets that held the faint, metallic scent of possibility. This wasn't an allowance. This was a lifeline thrown by a council that expected me to quietly strangle myself with it. They thought I would buy pretty trinkets and fade away, a well-funded ghost. But I had spent a lifetime fading. Now, the broken bond in my chest, that constant, aching reminder of a king's contempt, had become a forge. It was burning away the girl who apologized for existing, and what was left was harder, sharper. The fortress market was a riot of sound and scent, a stark contrast to the stone silence of the North Tower. Here the air was thick with the smell of roasting meats, exotic spices from human traders, leather, and the musky scent of a dozen different packs. I moved through the crowd, my plain cloak pulled tight, but I did not slink. I walked. My eyes, once always downcast, now scanned the stalls with a purpose that made a few vendors look twice. Whispers trailed me like shadows. The rejected Omega, the king's mistake. I let them wash over me. Their words were just echoes of the wound I carried inside. They had no power I did not give them. I found the cloth merchant, a shrewd-eyed woman with hands stained with dye. Her gaze swept over me, not with pity, but with calculation. "You seek material, lady?" she asked, the title cautious. "I seek a statement," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I ran my fingers over bolts of fabric. I bypassed the soft, meek pastels. My hands stopped on a swath of silk the color of a midnight sky just before a storm, a deep, fathomless blue that shimmered with hitting depth when it caught the light. Next, I chose a velvet, the rich, dark red of heart's blood. And finally, a heavy linen in a green so deep it was almost black, like ancient forest shadows. "These are not modest choices for an Omega," the merchant murmured, measuring me with her eyes. "They are not meant to be modest," I said, holding her gaze. "They are meant to be worn by someone who was no longer asking for permission to be seen." I gave her my measurements and instructions for cuts that spoke of dignity, not decoration, high necks that framed the face like a portrait, fitted bodices that suggested strength in the lines of the torso, skirts that flowed with movement but were slit for purpose, not provocation. I paid in silver, the coins disappearing into her strongbox with a final, satisfying clink. Carrying the packages back to the tower, my arms ached. The physical strain was a welcome distraction from the psychic one. Each step up the winding, endless stairs was a rebellion. I was not being dragged, I was climbing. The summons to the next formal feast arrived 2 days later, a slip of parchment delivered by the same silent servant. This time, I did not dread it. I prepared for it like a warrior for battle. I bathed in the meager, lukewarm water allotted to me. I brushed my pale hair until it shone like moonlight, then braided it in a complex, crown-like style I remembered from a painting of a long-dead queen. Then I put on the midnight blue silk. The dress slid over my skin like cool water given form. It was heavier than anything I'd ever worn, the fabric falling in clean, elegant lines. The high neck made me hold my head up. The cut of the bodice didn't hide my thinness. It sculpted it into something deliberate. The faint, ugly scar of the rejected mate mark on my neck was not hidden, but framed. A fact, a history. Let them look. For the first time, I looked into the small, clouded mirror and did not see a ghost. I saw a queen who had been thrown from her throne before she could sit on it. I saw a woman who had decided to rebuild that throne from the shattered pieces. My entrance into the great hall was not a slink from the shadows. I walked through the main archway, back straight, the silk whispering a challenge with every step. The effect was instant. A conversation near the door stuttered and died. Heads turned. The ripple of attention spread inward, a wave of silence moving ahead of me. I felt every gaze like a physical touch, curious, disapproving, intrigued, hostile. I kept my expression serene, a faint, unreadable smile on my lips. My eyes were fixed ahead, on the high table, on him. Kaelin Blackmane was in mid-sentence with the grizzled general. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the bond, that wretched, mangled tether, jolted as if struck by lightning. His head turned. Our eyes met across the vast, crowded space. For a heartbeat, the hall disappeared. There was only the shock in his gaze, the way his pupils dilated, swallowing the gold. His eyes dropped. They traveled from my face, down the column of my throat where his rejection mark pulsed, over the elegant lines of the silk dress that hugged my shoulders and waist, down to the hem brushing the stone floor. His fingers, resting loosely around a crystal goblet, tightened. I saw the bones of his knuckles stand out white against his skin. A surge of heat, fierce and confusing, shot down the bond. It wasn't the pain of rejection. It was something hotter, sharper, possessive, startled, angry. He masked it instantly, his face freezing back into its royal mask of indifference. But he was too slow. I had felt it. I had seen it. A thrill, cold and bright, shot through me. This was power. Not the power of dominance or strength, but the power of undeniable presence. I did not hurry. I walked the full, excruciating length of the hall to my designated place at the very end of the lowest table. I could feel his stare burning into my back the entire way. When I finally sat, smoothing the silk under my hands, I allowed myself to look towards the high table again. He was turned away, speaking to the general once more, but the line of his shoulders was rigid, his posture too perfect, like a statue under immense strain. The feast was a steady intention. I ate small bites of the rich food, sipped the spiced wine, and listened to the conversations around me with detached interest. Warriors who had never glanced my way before now found reasons to look down the table. Their eyes held new calculations. The message of the dress had been received. Then the true test arrived. A visiting Alfsal from Massoun Marshes, a man named Brant with a boisterous laugh and a calculating glint in his eye, swaggered over from the higher tables. He leaned casually on the empty chair beside me. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice a loud, friendly rumble that demanded attention. "That's a striking color, like the deep sea. A man could lose himself in it." His scent was all swamp water and sun-baked rock. It was overwhelming, intrusive. My wolf, deep inside, recoiled. But the bond in my chest gave a violent, sickening twist. It wasn't my pain. It was a surge of pure, undiluted fury that flooded through the connection from the other end. It was so potent it stole my breath. I smiled up at Brant, a small, polite curve of my lips. "Lord Brant, the marshes must be lacking in colorful vistas if my dress holds such fascination." He chuckled, missing or ignoring the edge in my tone. "The marshes have their beauty, but it's a wild, untamed sort, not this refined elegance." He reached out, as if to touch the silk at my sleeve. I did not flinch. I turned my arm slightly, letting the fabric slip from the path of his fingers. "Elegance is often just survival in a more polished form," I said softly, my gaze flicking for just a fraction of a second towards the high table. Kalen was no longer pretending to talk. He was watching. His entire body was still, but it was the stillness of a predator before the spring. The bond was a roaring torrent of aggression now, a silent scream of mine that vibrated in my very bones. The general beside him was talking, but Kalen wasn't listening. His world had narrowed to this point, to Brant's hovering hand, to my composed face. Brant, sensing the shift in the atmospheric pressure of the hall, finally followed my glance. He saw the king's expression. The blood drained from his face. His jovial mask slipped, revealing the cautious wolf beneath. He straightened up, clearing his throat. "A wise observation, my lady," he said, his voice suddenly formal. "Please, enjoy your meal." He retreated back to his own table with a haste that was almost comical. The moment he was gone, the pressure from the bond lessened, but it did not disappear. It simmered, a low, dangerous heat. I took a slow sip of my wine, the taste of victory on my tongue, bitter-sweet and intoxicating. I had done it. I had made myself impossible to ignore. I had turned my invisibility into a weapon, and I had drawn the king's fire. He was not indifferent. He was at war, with me, with the bond, with himself, and for the first time I had a front-row seat to the battle. The rest of the evening passed in a strange electric hum. I could feel Kalen's attention like a physical weight, even when he wasn't looking my way. When I laughed politely at a jest from a nearby diplomat, the bond flinched. The silence of the tower became a different kind of prison after the feast. It was no longer just empty. It was expectant. The air itself seemed to wait for the next move in a game whose rules I was only just beginning to understand. The memory of Kalen's furious, gold-flecked stare was a brand on my mind. I had cracked his control, and the fissure I'd created hummed with dangerous energy through our mangled bond. I needed space, not the cramped, cold space of stone, but the wild, open space of the night. I needed to remember what it was to be a wolf, not a pawn. I learned the rhythms of the fortress guards, the changing of the watch at the third bell after midnight, the path the kitchen boys took to dump scraps out the postern gate. My weeks of ignored existence had given me the perfect map of neglect. When the moon was a sharp sliver of white high above the peaks, I slipped from my room, a dark cloak over a simple shift, my feet bare and silent on the cold floors. No one saw the Omega ghost leave. No one cared enough to watch. The forest outside the walls was a living, breathing entity. The scent of pine needles, damp earth, and night-blooming flowers was a balm after the stale stone and tension of the fortress. The bond's ache faded to a dull background hum, soothed by distance and the simple primal act of moving under the moon. My wolf, that bruised and sleepy creature, lifted her head inside me, scenting the air with interest for the first time since the gathering. I followed a faint animal path deep into the trees, drawn by the sound of water. The forest pool lay in a hidden clearing, a perfect circle of black water cradled in mossy stone. Moonlight fell upon it like a silver blessing, transforming its surface into a mirror of stars. This was a place of old magic. I could feel it, a quiet, deep power that resonated in my bones. Without hesitation, I let my cloak fall. The night air was cold on my skin, raising goosebumps. For a moment, I stood there, a pale figure in the moonlight, vulnerable and utterly free. Then I dove. The water was a shock, icy enough to lock my muscles and steal my breath. I sank into the silent, dark world, letting the cold burn away the last traces of the hall's perfume, the whispers, the weight of watching eyes. Here, there was only the pressure in my ears, the slow beat of my heart, and the muted, peaceful silence of the deep. I surfaced with a gasp, pushing wet hair from my face. And I froze. He stood on the opposite bank. Kalen. Not the king in armor, but the man. He wore only dark trousers and a linen shirt, unlaced at the throat, the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He was barefoot. He looked unmade. His dark hair was loose, falling around a face that seemed younger without its crown of authority and anger. Moonlight painted silver along the stark lines of his cheekbones, the strong set of his jaw. But his eyes burned with a feral gold fire. He was just standing there, as still as the trees around him, watching me. The bond, which had been quiet, erupted. It wasn't pain this time. It was a cataclysm, a torrent of heat, shock, and a hunger so deep and desperate it felt like falling. His wolf was right there at the surface, staring out through his eyes, and it was not looking at a nuisance or a mistake. It was looking at its mate. The water around me suddenly felt too thin, too exposing. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum answering the furious call of the bond. I should have sunk beneath the surface. I should have covered myself, fled, shown some shred of modesty or fear. I did not. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up in the pool. The water streamed from my body in silver rivulets, the cold air kissing my skin. I did not try to hide the scars of a hard childhood, the thinness, the vulnerable lines of my body. I met his gaze and held it, letting him look his fill. His control shattered. I saw it happen. A tremor ran through his powerful frame. His hands, hanging at his sides, clenched into white-knuckled fists. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated in the air, a sound that came from his chest and echoed in mine. The hunger in his eyes was a physical force, a pull as potent as the moon's gravity. "You shouldn't be out here alone." His voice was ravaged, stripped bare, nothing like the cold, commanding tone he used in court. It was raw, threaded with a strain that was almost agony. I took a step toward the shore, the water lapping at my thighs. "You shouldn't be here either." His gaze snapped back to my face, as if my words were a challenge he couldn't ignore. For a heartbeat, the king, the fortress, the rejection, none of it existed. There was only this clearing, the moon, the water, and the two wolves caught in a bond they could neither accept nor break. "Turn around," he ground out, the words forced through gritted teeth. "Cover yourself." "No." The refusal hung in the air, simple and absolute. His eyes widened slightly. "You have taken everything else from me." My voice was quiet but clear in the hushed forest. "My dignity on the terrace, my peace in the tower. You don't get to tell me what to do with my own skin. This is my choice." I took another step, then another, walking out of the pool. Water cascaded from me and pooling at my feet on the mossy stone. The cold was biting, but I refused to let my body shiver. I held myself tall, walking toward him with a slow, deliberate pace that ate up the distance between us. I stopped an arm's length away, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, to see the rapid pulse at the base of his throat, to smell the storm and iron scent of him, now mingled with something wild and desperate. "Take a good look, Kaylin," I whispered, my breath forming a pale cloud in the space between us. "This is what you rejected. This is the weakness you feared. Look at it." A sound escaped him, a half-choked growl. His hand twitched upward, his fingers curling as if to reach for my face, my shoulder, to touch the water droplets sliding down my collarbone. The gold in his eyes blazed, his wolf surging forward with a need that screamed through the bond, loud enough to drown all thought. For one dizzying, endless second, I thought he would close the distance. I thought the last shred of his control would snap, and he would finally claim what the moon had given him. Instead, he recoiled. He stumbled back a full step, as if my proximity was a physical blow. The raw hunger in his eyes was brutally extinguished, smothered under a wave of icy horror. The king slammed back into place, his expression hardening into a mask of grim fury. "Go back to your room. Now, before I forget all the reasons I have to stay away." The bond lurched violently, a sickening swing from searing heat to desolate cold. The whiplash of it made me sway. He turned on his heel and strode into the trees, disappearing into the shadows without a back glance. He was gone, leaving only the echo of his scent and the crushing silence of the clearing. I stood there, dripping and alone, the triumphant fire in my veins guttering into ashes. He had looked, he had wanted, and he had chosen, again, to run. But as I gathered my cloak with numb fingers, a new realization settled in my chest, colder than the mountain air. He was not running from me. He was running from himself, from the wolf that recognized its mate, from the bond that was stronger than his fear, from the truth he had seen in the moonlight. And a wolf who runs is a wolf who can be cornered. I walked back to the fortress, my body cold, but my mind feverishly alert. The game had changed at the pool. It was no longer about defiance for the sake of defiance. It was about understanding the enemy, and I had just learned his deepest weakness. He was terrified of the part of himself that wanted me. That night, long after I had returned to my tower, I lay awake, and as the castle slept, I heard it. Not a sound with my ears, but through the bond, the soft, relentless scrape of claws on stone, pacing, back and forth outside my door, a furious, trapped predator, unable to stay away, unable to come in. I listened to the sound of his struggle, a secret symphony of frustration played on granite, and a slow, grim smile touched my lips in the dark. The cage, it seemed, held 2 prisoners, and I was no longer the one rattling the bars. The scrape of claws outside my door became the rhythm of my nights. It wasn't a constant sound. It was the punctuation to the long, silent sentences of my imprisonment. Some nights it would start just after midnight, a slow, grating drag that spoke of a mind caught in a loop of torment. Other nights it was a frantic, staccato pacing that only ceased when the first gray light of dawn touched the high window. He never spoke, never knocked. The bond between us, that ragged, aching wound, simply vibrated with the raw, unfiltered energy of his conflict. I stopped crying. The tears had been burned away, replaced by a cold, focused clarity. Every scrape of claw on stone was a lesson. It taught me about the depth of his struggle. It taught me that the mighty Alpha King, who could command armies with a glance, was helpless against the moon-forged tie that bound his soul to mine. His power was my leverage. His fear was my weapon. The official decree arrived one morning, delivered by a stiff-backed Gamma. It was short, written in stark black ink on heavy parchment, sealed with the snarling wolf sigil of the Blackmanes. By order of the Alpha King, the Omega Ilara of the Silent Fang is hereby forbidden from participating in combat training or any martial activity within the bounds of Blackcliff Keep. This decree is absolute. Disobedience will be considered a direct challenge to the crown. It was signed with a slashing, powerful K. I held the parchment, the wax seal cool against my thumb. This wasn't about my safety. This was about his jealousy. This was the wolf who had paced outside my door, reacting to the mere idea of other males touching me, guiding my hands, shaping my body into something that could fight back. He had felt that phantom threat through the bond, and his response was not to claim, but to forbid, to cage. A slow smile, devoid of warmth, touched my lips. You are watching, Kaylin, and you are afraid. I folded the decree neatly and placed it under my thin pillow, a reminder, not of my limits, but of his. My next move required a different kind of armor. The silk had been a declaration. Now I needed a scalpel. I spent my days in the fortress library, a dusty, neglected room few warriors ever entered. I sought out histories, not of glorious battles, but of treaties, of alliances forged through marriage, through trade, through subtle manipulation. I read about the structure of the 5 realms, the delicate balance of power, the hidden grievances between pacts. I learned the names of every council member, their loyalties, their ambitions. I memorized the lineages, the old slights, the potential cracks in the kingdom's foundation. I was no longer just the rejected mate. I was a student of the court that despised me. During the evening meals, my strategy shifted. I no longer just sat in defiant silence. I listened. I absorbed. I watched the intricate dance of power at the high table. I saw how Lord Varen, the head of the council, leaned close to Kaylin, his words always smooth, his advice always steering toward caution and isolation. I saw the distrust in the eyes of the Alpha from the eastern Frostfang pack when he looked at the southern marsh wolves. I stored it all. One evening, as a minor trade dispute between 2 border packs was being discussed, a thought occurred to me. A solution, simple and elegant, based on an old precedent I had read about just that afternoon. It slipped from my lips before I could think better of it, my voice quiet but clear in a momentary lull. Could the dispute not be settled by reviving the old river pact, the one from King Alaric's time? It divided the fishing rights by season, not by bank. It lasted 50 years before the flood changed the course. Silence fell over my end of the table. Then, a few seats down from an elderly beta from one of the disputing packs turned to me, his bushy eyebrows raised. The river pacts, by the moon, I'd forgotten that. My grandfather spoke of it. It was fair. The beta from the other pack grunted, considering. Seasonal rites. It would solve the summer spawning ground argument. The conversation rippled outward from me, picked up by others, and slowly made its way toward the high table. I didn't look to see if Kaylin had heard. I kept my eyes on my plate, but my heart was pounding. I had not wielded a sword. I had wielded a memory, and it had cut through the noise. Later that night, the pacing outside my door was different. It was slower, more deliberate. The furious energy was gone, replaced by a heavy, contemplative rhythm. The bond hummed with a new, confusing texture, not anger, not hunger, but a prickling, unsettling curiosity. The next day, a small, unexpected package was delivered with my meal. It was a book, a heavy, leather-bound volume titled Histories and Laws of the Blackmanes. There was no note, but I knew this was not a gift from the council. It was a test, a gauntlet thrown down in the language of intellect, not instinct. I opened the book. The pages were thick, the ink faded. In the margins of a chapter on judicial reforms, in a bold, slashing script that matched the decree under my pillow, was a single underlined phrase. Authority derived solely from strength is a kingdom built on sand. My breath caught. Was he mocking me, or was he communicating? That night, I waited until the pacing began. I sat on the floor, my back against the cold stone door, the book in my lap. I spoke to the wood and iron between us, my voice barely above a whisper. The sentence after that one, I said into the darkness, it reads, "The wise ruler builds with the stones of law, so his people have a foundation when his strength falters. You stopped reading too soon, Your Majesty." The pacing stopped. Utter silence pressed against the door. The bond flared, a sharp spike of what felt like shock, then a rush of something hot and intensely focused. I felt seen, in a way I'd never been, even when he looked at my body in the forest pool. This was a seeing of the mind. No sound came from the corridor, but the silence now was alive, charged. After a long minute, the footsteps walked away, but they were not the frantic steps of flight. They were measured, purposeful. The next evening, a new book arrived with my meal, this one on military logistics. A passage about supply lines in mountainous terrain was marked, no note. And so, a new, bizarre ritual was born. By day, I was the ignored Omega, studying in the library, observing the court. By night, I became a participant in a silent, clandestine debate with a king. We argued through marginalia, through chosen texts left like breadcrumbs. He challenged me with treatises on economics. I countered with philosophies of governance from the southern human cities. He presented battle strategies. I pointed out the political consequences of civilian casualties mentioned in the footnotes. The claw marks ceased. The bond did not heal. It still ached, a chronic pain, but the texture of the connection changed. It was no longer just a conduit of pain and fury. It hummed with intellectual energy, with a fierce, grudging respect. We were fencing with ideas across a no-man's land of stone and regret. I began to understand him, not the king, but the man. His notes revealed a mind burdened by duty, deeply versed in history, and trapped by the legacy of his father's fail love. He was trying to be a king of stone because he believed a king of flesh and heart was a doomed king. And I, in my quiet responses in ink, began to show him another way, not through submission, but through partnership, not through the strength of the wolf alone, but through the cunning of the human mind paired with it. One night, the exchange broke form. I had left a volume open on my floor to a passage about an ancient queen who had ruled alone after her mate's death, renowned for her wisdom. In the margin, I had written simply, "Strength has many faces." The book was gone the next morning, but that evening no new book took its place. Instead, as dusk settled, a single perfect black feather lay on the floor outside my door. It was from a raven, glossy and sharp, a symbol of the Blackmanes, a symbol of him. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. This was not a word, not an argument. It was an emblem, a silent, profound acknowledgement. That night, for the first time, I felt him not just outside my door, but with me. The bond softened from its constant ache into a low, steady thrum of presence. I sat on my bed, the feather in my hand, and I did not feel like a prisoner. I felt like a strategist in a war of hearts and thrones. I had been placed in a cage of stone, but with every book, every whispered conversation through a door, I was building a key, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the king in the corridor was building the lock. The black feather became a secret I wore against my skin, tucked into the binding of the book on my nightstand. Its presence was a paradox, a symbol of the king who imprisoned me, now a token of a clandestine understanding. The silent debates through borrowed books had forged a new kind of bond within the broken one. It was a bridge of intellect over a chasm of pain, and with each crossing, the chasm felt less absolute. The fortress, however, was not a library. It was a den of wolves whose laws were written in tooth and claw. My foray into politics at the dinner table had not gone unnoticed by those for whom power was not a philosophical exercise. Lord Varen found me in the library 3 days after the feather appeared. He moved with a serpent's grace between the towering shelves, his scent, parchment, cold tea, and a faint cloying perfume preceding him like a warning. "The little scholar," he murmured, his voice a dry rustle. He plucked the book from my hands, a dense analysis of interrealm trade tariffs. A curious pastime for one in your position. I kept my gaze lowered, the submissive Omega. "The days are long, my lord. The mind seeks occupation." "Does it?" He tilted his head, his eyes pale and calculating. "I would have thought a mind connected to our kings would have quite enough to occupy it. Tell me, does he share these scholarly pursuits with you through your unique connection?" The question was a trap wrapped in silk. He was probing the nature of the bond, testing its limits. The council feared what they could not control, and a mate bond, even a rejected one, was a wild card in their carefully ordered deck. "The bond is a wound, my lord," I said, layering my voice with a believable tremor. "It carries pain, not politics." Varen's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. Pain can be a powerful motivator, and a powerful distraction. He replaced the book on the shelf, his finger tracing its spine. "The king has many enemies, girl. Some beyond our walls, some within. A distracted king is a vulnerable king, and what befalls a vulnerable king?" He let the sentence hang, its unfinished threat colder than the stone around us. He was not just warning me, he was revealing a truth. The opposition to Kaelin wasn't just about me. I was merely the current fissure in his armor, the points where Varen and his allies were pressing their knives. "I am no one, my lord," I whispered, pouring every ounce of practiced helplessness into the words. "I cannot distract what was never truly focused on me." He studied me for a long moment, then gave a curt nod, seemingly satisfied with my display of pathetic ignorance. "See that you remain no one. It is the safest thing to be." When he left, the scent of his perfume lingered, a toxic flower in the dusty air. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Varen's warning was a key turning in a lock, revealing a darker chamber of the game. This wasn't just about a mate bond. It was about the throne itself. That night, I did not wait for a book. I took a risk. On a blank piece of parchment, I wrote a single line in my finest, clearest hand. a quote from a human historian I had found. "The most dangerous enemy is the one who has learned to love the cage." I slipped it under my door. The response was not a book, nor a feather. An hour later, a small, flat leather case was pushed silently beneath the door. Inside was not a treatise, but a set of maps. Detailed, annotated maps of Blackcliff Keep and its surrounding territories. One showed the fortress itself, with guards' rotations marked in a subtle code. Another detailed the mountain passes. A third, the borders of the 5 realms, stamped with wax seals of rival alphas, including Silas Thorne's jagged thorn sigil. This was not philosophy. This was intelligence. This was trust of a terrifying magnitude. My hands shook as I spread the maps on the floor. Here was the kingdom's pulse, its vulnerabilities, its secrets, laid bare for the rejected Omega in the tower. The bond throbbed, not with pain, but with a fierce, protective urgency. He was showing me his world, not to intimidate, but to include, to arm me with knowledge, because he could not arm me with a sword. The following afternoon, the brittle peace shattered. I was returning from the library when I heard the commotion in the lower courtyard, shouts, the clash of steel, a snarl that raised the hair on my arms. Driven by an impulse I didn't understand, I hurried to a narrow arrow-slit window that overlooked the training yard. A training match had gone wrong. A young, fiery-haired beta from the Frostfang pack lay on the hard-packed earth, his leg bent at a sickening angle, his face white with pain. Standing over him was a hulking warrior from the southern marshes, Brant's lieutenant, with his practice sword still raised, a cruel smirk. The air reeked of aggression and broken rules. "He yielded!" shouted the Frostfang captain, his voice cracking with fury. The marsh warrior spat. He was slow. In a real fight, a yield unheeded is a head unattached. I'm teaching him a lesson. It was a blatant provocation. The tension between the 2 packs, the one I'd read about in dry histories, was now a live wire sparking on the ground. Warriors from both sides began to circle, growls rumbling. This was how wars between allies started, with a petty act of brutality in a training yard. Then Kalen was there. He hadn't come from the keep. He seemed to materialize from the very shadows of the wall, his presence slamming into the courtyard like a physical force. He didn't shout. He didn't draw a weapon. He simply walked into the center of the circle, his gaze sweeping over the marsh warrior, then the Frostfang captain. The silence was absolute. "You," Kalen said, his voice low and deadly calm, pointing to the marsh warrior. "You broke the covenants of the training ground. You are confined to the marsh quarters. Your alpha will answer for your conduct." The warrior's smirk vanished, replaced by fear. He bowed his head and scurried away. Then Kalen turned to the injured beta. His stern expression didn't change, but his voice softened a fraction. "Your pain is witnessed. Your pack's honor is intact. The healers will see to you." He looked at the Frostfang captain. "See that he is carried with care." It was masterful. In under a minute, he had dispelled a riot, administered justice, and solved a wounded pride, all without a single blow. He had used authority, not just dominance. I saw the respect dawn in the eyes of the Frostfang wolves, the sullen acceptance in the departing marsh soldiers. He was about to turn away when his gaze lifted, as if pulled by a string, and found me in the arrow slit. Our eyes locked across the chaotic yard. In that brief, public glance, there was no hiding. I saw the exhaustion behind the authority, the weight of constantly holding a fracturing kingdom together, and I saw him, watching, understanding. The bond sang a single clear note, not of pain, but of a shared grim comprehension. This was his cage, not a tower, but a throne surrounded by knives and simmering hatreds. And I, in that moment, was not a distraction, but a witness. He turned and strode back into the keep, the crowd parting for him. But the image was seared in my mind. The king as peacemaker, the king burdened, the king alone. That night, I knew the maps were not just information. They were a confession, a sharing of a burden. When the familiar, now almost comforting sense of his presence settled outside my door, I did not pick up a book. I spoke to the wood, my voice firm. Lord Varen visited me. He fears a distracted king. He implied there are enemies within who would use any weakness. The silence from the corridor was deeper than before. I felt a surge of something through the bond, sharp, focused anger, but not at me, at the truth I had voiced. After a long moment, his voice came through the door, low and rough, the first words he had spoken to me since the forest pool. Varen is a spider who mistakes the vibrations in his web for power. He knows nothing of true weakness. My heart leapt into my throat at the sound of his voice. And what is true weakness? I dared to ask. The pause was so long I thought he had gone. Then 2 words, filled with a lifetime of bitter conviction. Caring alone. I understood. He saw his love for his parents, the very thing that made him human, as the flaw that had doomed them. He saw the mate bond as a repeat of that fatal error. To care was to have a heart, and a heart could be stabbed. A king who cares for nothing is a tyrant, and tyrants are overthrown. Another silence. Then the sound of his palm pressing flat against the wood, a soft thud that vibrated through the wood and into my spine. And what is a king who cares for the wrong thing, Ilara? He said my name. It was the first time. It wasn't Girl or Omega. It was Ilara. It felt like a key turning in the lock of my cage. Perhaps, I said, my own hand rising to mirror his on the cold wood, separated by only an inch of oak. Maybe he's not a king yet. Maybe he's just a man learning to build a foundation that can bear the weight of caring. There was no reply, only the